Okay, everyone, here we are with the first episode of season 2, and we have FantaSci William Shatner Indie Auteur award-winning filmmaker Mark Largent. Mark, what are you eating tonight?
I've gone extremely fancy. I have a plastic bowl, but I put a dish underneath it so it can still be dishing. It's an Atlantis bowl. It's a salad place called Bread Zeppelin. So it has a neat thing. They actually stick the dressing in there to make a hole. So when you put the dressing in, you've already got a hole to put the dressing in. So you get a puddle of dressing.
Well,
it's basically like a Greek salad.
Nice. Due to my kitchen remodel, I have ordered out as well. I'm having a burrito bowl.
Oh, I thought about the burrito bowl.
Yeah, so we'll just dig right in. And I know that you and I are about the same age and grew up on Star Trek. And your film from FantaSci this year was kind of a parody of a famous TOS episode. And for those of you who are under-initiated, TOS stands for the original series.
Yes. Which is what we call Star Trek, which had nothing attached to it. It's funny that we have to clarify what it is.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like Star Wars A New Hope, or episode 4. We have to.
Exactly. Some of us saw it when it wasn't A New Hope.
Absolutely. We're the same age, so we would have been, what, 9? Yeah, that's right, 9.
Yeah, well, I was 8 in May. I turned 9 in October that year.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I saw Star Wars, getting off subject a bit. I saw Star Wars in the initial run in the back seat of my mom's Pinto at a drive-in.
Oh, okay. I was trying to think. We went to one of the theaters. I was living on Homestead Air Force Base in southern Florida. And so I know we went somewhere around Miami or something there to see it when it initially came. And then we went again the next year when they re-released it in theaters. But I always tell people my 2 thoughts that I remember from seeing Star Wars was afterwards turning to my parents and just being amazed that the spaceships were fast. Because anytime we'd seen spaceships, they were just slow moving. Even the old Flash Gordon thing was just, and I was convinced the robots were real robots. I completely refused to believe that there were people in the robots. And my mom was like, no, I'm pretty sure there are people in them. And I was like, well, no, there couldn't possibly be people in those. Those are real robots.
Well, they're real to us.
Yes. But I do think that gets lost on people is the fact that Star Wars is the first time you had fast spaceships. And they were really fast. It made it really exciting.
Well, that was one of George's things is he said he wanted it to be like dogfighting. World War II films, and he pulled that off.
Yeah, he really did, and he had wanted to be a race car driver. He had been in races until he had a car accident, not during a race, but so he had that need for speed.
Mm-hmm. Before Picard season 1 came out, I was like, I'm going to go back and rewatch everything. So I've rewatched. I'm almost done with Enterprise.
Okay,
and in watching them all so closely together, one thing that jumped out at me was like my favorite theme song. Do you have a favorite theme song from the TV shows?
It's hard not to go with the Jerry Goldsmith one that they used for Star Trek: The Next Generation. Although I really like the Deep Space Nine one too. I thought the Voyager one was good. It was a little mellow. I definitely did not like the Enterprise song.
That was a big swing and a miss.
It's been a long road getting from there to here.
As much as, the classic is great, Next Generation was a great update, I just think Voyagers is beautiful.
It is.
Theme song.
Yeah.
And then when you watch it, you always like skip the intro because you see it so many times. I very rarely skip the intro to Voyager because I was like, this song is just beautiful. have our favorites and everything, but so what? I mean, maybe I should even say excluding TOS. Do you have a favorite series, or do you just have like favorite episodes?
I do have favorite episodes. I was one of those people who actually really liked Deep Space Nine.
Mhm.
Uh, Initially, it was kind of different, and but it grew into something where I really was into. The Next Generation was great, but by the end of the Next Generation, that last season, I think all their focus was really on Deep Space Nine, and that last season, I was surprised. I did a rewatch about 10 or 12 years ago, and I was surprised that there were episodes in the seventh season that maybe I didn't watch them or I'd completely forgotten about them.
Mhm.
And with Voyager, I was on board at the beginning on Voyager,
Right.
and I sort of had this. I'd never been to a Star Trek convention. I was living in the South. I didn't really have access to anything like that. And in '96, which was the 30th anniversary, they were having a big, giant celebration convention in Huntsville, Alabama, because they had the space camp and stuff there. And it was going to feature not only Star Trek people, but also actual astronauts, which was really cool. And it turned out to be the last time the entire original cast was together on stage.
Oh, wow.
Which we didn't know at the time. But it was a 3-day thing. And as much as I loved Star Trek, by the end of it, I was burnt out on Star Trek. And Jerry Taylor, who was a writer and producer on Voyager, in one of her panels said something to the effect of, it's our official policy that there's no such thing as a new Star Trek story, that they've all been told. And so there was this idea that Voyager was just going to retell Star Trek stories in a slightly different way.
Hmm.
And I remember being taken aback by that and thinking, well, wait a minute, there should be new stories to tell.
Of course.
Yeah, I actually quit watching Voyager. I don't remember exactly what point, but and I did go back many years later and rewatch the series. But yeah, I was kind of like, I was out at that point.
Yeah.
And you know, they'd been doing Star Trek at that point for many years. And I did come back for Enterprise. And Enterprise was slow moving. I think it really found its voice its last season.
Yep. Season 4. Exactly.
Yeah.
After
And
they got good.
yeah, I mean, and it was kind of because they knew they were canceled and they just sort of said, let's go. Let's just do what we wanted to do with it.
Oh.
Yeah, I've always thought that they really got shortchanged.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I think Voyager and Enterprise were both network shows.
UPN.
Yeah, which meant that they had network interference that I don't think the Next Generation or Deep Space Nine had, being syndicated shows.
Yeah,
and I think there was more of a, because you know, to get the Next Generation going, I think in that first season, I believe they offered the show free to a lot of markets.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you know, there was incentive to go ahead and show it, and I don't think they were as concerned with ratings until they went back to being on networks again.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about. I think let's just jump into the first 6. Star
Okay.
Trek: The Motion Picture, to me, is 2001 for the 70s. I think it's that good.
Yeah. Well, there was definitely an attempt to distinguish or it from Star Wars is space fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
I think nowadays everyone just assumes that it's sci-fi, but it's really not. It's space fantasy.
Yeah, space opera.
Yeah. Well, and it's a fairy tale. It literally starts off with, you know, long, long ago in a faraway land. It's princesses and wizards and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think there was definitely a point of wanting to make Star Trek science fiction. And I think 2001 was definitely the thing. Now, I have a better appreciation for Star Trek, the motion picture now than I did when it originally came out, because I was 11 and I remember the hardest thing I had was, and I noticed this with my nephews, when you're a little kid, it's harder to tell who the actors are. I would do this with my nephews and say, oh, that's the guy who was in this other one. And if you looked any way different, they couldn't make that connection. And I remember when the motion picture was coming out, they had this ad. It was a poster that ran on the back of a bunch of comics. And at the very bottom, it had all these little photos of the cast. And, Scotty had a mustache.
Right.
And Kirk's hair was different. And everybody Spock looked like Spock. But everybody looked a little different, being 10 years later. And I just remember that being the big thing for me as a kid, was just trying to see their faces in there. And I do recall going to a matinee of it and falling asleep. It was often referred to as Star Trek: The Motionless Picture.
It's hard sci-fi.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah,
there's a great series of books. There's a guy named Mark Cushman, and he wrote. He's had access to Gene Roddenberry's production paperwork, and he wrote a series of 3 novels or 3 books, each one covering a season of the production of the original series, and then he did 3 that were in the 70s, which. I was very excited when those books came out, and then I was horribly depressed reading them because, for that being Star Trek's, most popular time, it was really depressing how it was going nowhere, and especially Roddenberry was really put through the ringer on those. His health started to go. He started abusing drugs and alcohol, and but by the time they got to Star Trek, the motion picture, Roddenberry was still trying to maintain some kind of control, and he was in constant battles with the guy who had written the screenplay. He was rewriting it, which was a thing that he used to do on the original show, because his thought was that only he really understood Star Trek, or not so much that only he did, but that writers from outside of it didn't quite get it.
Well, that was his baby. I can see that point of view.
Yeah, but the actual writers didn't agree with that point of view. It didn't like having their scripts.
No, I've heard commentary from Rick Berman and others saying that Roddenberry's Star Trek was, everybody is happy and works together and they're all functional. Well, that doesn't create enough drama for a TV show.
Right. And I think a lot of that came from the fact that there was such that long dry period where he was going to conventions and talking about Star Trek, and people were kind of saying, well, why is the captain beaming down? That doesn't make any sense. He's going into danger, you're going to lose the captain. And so I think in a lot of ways, there were things in the Next Generation were sort of trying to cover this new sensibility about things. You'd have, Riker would be the one who'd beam down and the captain would stay on the ship. That didn't last long, but that was initially the idea. And like you said, I think it was a great thing that Roddenberry wanted Star Trek to believe that we get better. That we're essentially toddlers and infants right now, but there's a point where we're going to mature, and these problems that plague us now won't plague us in the future.
Right.
But like you said, that's hard to do drama with.
Well, right. He dreamed of a conflict-free future. And as Spock said in The Undiscovered Country, ancient Chinese curse is "May you live in interesting times," which
Right.
Should resonate to everybody.
Yes, unfortunately, we do live in interesting times.
Exactly. You don't want to live in interesting times. You want to live in boring times where everybody makes money and they pay their bills and they take vacations and everything's hunky dory.
Yeah,
But that makes for a boring TV show.
right. But so Roddenberry, it was fascinating to me. William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy both had script approval for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which when they sort of blocked Roddenberry from being able to work on the script anymore, because they were actually the script was not finished when they started filming. But Shatner and Nimoy got together with the director Ray Wise and actually rewrote a lot of their lines and suggested scenes and smart insightful ideas they had. They knew those characters by that point.
Exactly.
And
interactions.
So I think that it was a troubled production that still managed to make a good movie in the end. But I do prefer Star Trek 2 to Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Yeah, I was enamored with it, and I remember staying up, after midnight watching it in my bedroom on HBO, and I really loved it. Okay, so take a bite. I'm gonna beam out,
All right.
out here for just a second, and I'll be right back. And so maybe one of the fondest things I have about Star Trek: The Motion Picture is right after my mother took me to go see it, we went down to Tin City in Naples, Florida, and went to a little toy store, and she bought me this.
Oh, how about that?
Mm-hmm. Now, it used to put little discs in here that you could shoot. So I don't have those anymore, but I do have the shuttlecraft.
That's pretty cool. Comes out of the wrong place, but that's cool.
Exactly.
Yeah, Star Trek was the merchandise for Star Trek toy wise very rarely matched up to what was on the screen. It was befuddling to try to understand some of it.
Well, I have another funny story about the toys. When I was living out in Foster City, California with my mother, I don't know why, but I was in the back of her Pinto, the Pinto again, and I had a bad day at school. I don't know, something was wrong, and she wanted to cheer me up. So she said, "So who's your favorite, Captain Kirk or Mr. Spock?" And I said, "Captain Kirk." And I was in the back seat. She said, "Okay, reach under my seat." So I reached under the driver's seat, and there was the Captain Kirk doll.
The Mego doll, yeah.
Yes, I was like, "Oh my God, this is so cool." Da, 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 da. And I don't know, I was a brilliant child. For some reason, I was like, well, wait a minute. And I reached under the passenger seat, and there was the Mr. Spock doll.
Yeah, that magic trick only worked if they were both there. Yeah, I had this one Christmas that was unlike any other Christmas where my grandparents came in and spoiled the heck out of me, and I got the bridge play set with the figures, and there was it was a phaser that you could put little things almost like the bat signal. You could put these little silhouetted things, and you would press it, and it was like a flashlight, and it would project things on the wall. But it also would make noise and stuff. And then we also got the walkie-talkie communicators, which again, for some reason, were blue. Weren't the same colors. And I had a little sister, and we went through 2 sets of those because she would break it in like 5 seconds. And I don't know if you remember, they had this great commercial for them where, somehow some kids on the other side of town and could talk to his friend with this communicator. And of course, they really only worked across the room, maybe.
Kevin, this is Scott. Kevin, this is Scott. Do you hear me? Over and out.
The Star Trek communicators with push-to-talk button.
Scott, this is Kevin. My bike is broken. Can you help me?
Over.
Yes, but send me a signal so I can find you.
Star Trek communicators with a range of 1,300 feet, push button, twin warp sound, uses 9-volt battery not included. Star Trek communicators with belt hook, telescoping antenna, and twin warp sound from Mego.
So what?
But so we got to Star Trek 2. So that's my favorite. I watched that one over and over again. I even recorded it onto an audio cassette and used to listen to it in my car when I was in college.
Oh, wow.
I got to the point where I'd heard it so many times that I could actually watch the VHS tape with the sound down and not notice. It was imprinted in my brain. And I had done the same thing. At that point, they had started to come out with the original series on a video cassette.
Mm-hmm.
And you could go to, one of the mom and pop video stores and rent the episodes. And I had rented Amok Time and The City on the Edge of Forever. And on one of those 120-minute tapes, I taped Amok Time on one and City on the Edge of Forever on the other side. And I used to listen to those. And I ended up making parodies of both of those because they were so imprinted in my brain that I couldn't help but make fun of them.
Yeah. So yeah, going back to that, I mean, I encourage everyone out there to watch your film. Is it on YouTube yet? It's not yet.
So Amok Time is the parody of Amok Time. It is on YouTube.
Okay.
I did it actually. It's 10 years ago now.
Okay.
Because I really liked the idea. It was a parody of Amok Time, and the gag was that Mr. Spot was a volcanine. So he was a mutt because he was half volcanine and half human, so he was a mutt. And so then it was a bunch of dog jokes, instead of to pow, you had to poodle, and instead of to pring, you had to Pomeranian. And so every once in a while, I just came back to that. I must have done the story in like comic strip or comic book form 4 or 5 times between 96 when I started it and 2012 when I actually did it. And I had started, I'd found a low, an affordable 3D animation program, and with the intent of making it that way. And it took me a few years to sort of get up to speed where I could do it. And in one of the variations of it, I just came up with this idea that maybe if it did puppets, it would be easier. So with the 3D animation, I said, well, I could make them puppets and then I could potentially do it. I saw that was practical. I sort of, my thinking was like South Park. This is sort of this limited animation thing, but it makes it possible for me to actually get it done. Mm-hmm. And so at the January 1st of 2012, I made it my New Year's resolution. I bought a table at the Dallas Comic-Con, which was going to be in May. And I said, I'm going to make this movie, have it on DVD, and sell it at this convention. And astonishingly, after all those years of hit and miss, it's all the stars lined up and everything worked. Kickstarter was relatively new then, but I found it and was able to get people to back it, which allowed me to buy the DVDs, and I had it done ready. So that one was the one, and then it was sort of, if I was going to do another one, it was always going to be City on the Edge of Foreclosure. And I'd even started it a couple of times as a comic book or something. But I just always knew it would be hard.
But the result is amazing.
Thank you.
Like I said during our awards, it looked so real, but the movements were too perfect. I'm like, this has to be animation, but it just looks so realistic. You did a fantastic job.
Well, what I lucked into was that the uncanny valley goes away with puppets.
Yes, clearly.
You were able to notice that they didn't quite move exactly right. But as far as the look of them, it was fairly easy to make them look realistic. And it is funny, people will ask me, if I have the puppets. And I say, no, I don't. But and then I'll get the people every once in a while, well, wouldn't it be easier just to do it as puppets? And I'm like, no. You would have to make all of those puppets. You would have to build all the sets. You'd have to have lights and cameras and puppeteers and cameramen and everything that you would need to make a movie. You would have to have that small army, as opposed to just me sitting in front of my computer for hours and hours and hours and months and years.
Where do you stand on the resurgence of Trek? We could talk about the J.J. Abrams movies also, but I'm talking about the new shows, Discovery and Picard and Strange New Worlds.
I want to believe.
That's X-Files.
Yes. It's a franchise now that's owned by a corporation that says we should be making money off of this. But the problem is you're not making them with the same people who made the originals. So it's you talked about how passionate Gene Roddenberry was. Well, he's not alive anymore, and the person who's going to get this assignment just sees it as an assignment in a sense. I mean, whatever they want to do with it, you're going to do it, but it's not the source. Plus, do you make it appeal to 50 and 60-year-old people, or do you go after the 20-somethings? And the answer is you go after the 20-somethings. So how do you balance that to make something? I mentioned doing a Mutt Time as a DVD and trying to sell it at a convention. What I found out was that young people don't watch the original series. It's too campy for them. They can't get past the cardboard, sets or plywood sets and that sort of thing. So I would be talking to people who were dressed up in, as Captain Kirk or something from the original series, but they were like, well, I've never watched it. My dad watches it or something. So how do you make that appeal to this younger audience? I mean, that's the thing you gotta do. And they're not aimed at me. So in watching them, I sort of just take that into account. I do think that I've been disappointed that they've kind of gone overboard on the conflict and the gloom and doom. Yes, it's really hard to have drama without some kind of conflict, but that was a key part of Star Trek that I do think is missing now. So I sort of struggled through it. I was even disappointed by Picard. I watched both seasons, but the character never felt like Picard. I think Picard was prickly. He was he really wasn't somebody you want to hang around with. He was kind of stern and stiff and everyone could change, so it's possible, but it never really gelled for me. But I got to admit, I'm enjoying Strange New Worlds.
Yes.
It's fun, and I can play the canon game with the best of them. I'm a nerd, and I've watched a lot of Star Trek, but at this point, I can also say this is them making a Star Trek show in 2022. It's not a continuation of what they did in 1966.
Yeah, you can't.
So,
right. So, yeah. But I mean, like, my issues with Discovery are going back to even TOS, and especially Motion Picture and Search for Spock, Wrath of Khan. Search for Spock started to get a little cheesy. But the first two films and a lot of TOS, they had a lot of investigation and discovery and peeling back layers to figure out the mystery. Whereas in Discovery, they have a conversation on the bridge. They give every character one line, which they somehow figure everything out in a minute.
Yes. And And then annoyingly, they compare it to something that a preschooler would understand. Like, they'll go, what if we did this thing? Oh, like a seesaw on a playground. And they're going, yes. And I'm going like, there's also a lot of things like they had a time crystal.
I was going to
like a magic rock.
Season 3, there was it 3? There was something about time, and they found out, oh, the Klingons have this planet of time crystals.
Yeah.
And of all species, the Klingons, well,
yeah,
we're going to go back in time and dominate the galaxy. That's the dumbest thing they've ever done.
That's the thing that has hurt me the most. I once described Discovery as like, it's like my nerdy thing has been taken over by the popular kids, and now they're booting me out because that's kind of what it is. And it's and that's the part that's unforgivable to me when I watch it, is when it's dumb. Because Star Trek always tried to appeal to intellectuals and to people who actually were interested in science rather than cheerleaders for science. I felt like so many times I would just struggle with those sort of things where I'm going like, yeah, and like you said, they even do that in Strange New Worlds. There's this idea that if you have a large cast, everybody has to have a line, so they end up people finishing other people's sentences just so that everybody gets to say something. And that doesn't seem natural in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it was really bad. I'm unfortunately, maybe I'm a completist, so I have to watch all of Star Trek.
Yeah.
So, I've even seen Discovery season 4, and when they had every bridge officer standing in the landing docking bay, talking about how to communicate with this alien creature, and they figured out the mathematics behind it, and it was just so typical of what we're talking about. Every character had to say, "Oh yeah, and I wrote a seesaw." Or, well, that means this, and everything perfectly works out. We figured it out in 40 seconds. Oh.
Yeah, and then yay, science. In making a cartoon, it's a lot different than making a film, in the sense that, editing doesn't really exist in what I do. I kind of do that in the beginning with stills. If I do storyboards or something, I'll figure out the timing for shots, but I don't do, 2 long shots and then figure out where to cut them. I know I need this many frames for this shot and this many frames for that shot. Right. And the biggest thing I've been conscious of in trying to figure out these things is that filmmaking is a language. We understand from watching films what things mean. Mm-hmm. It's and if you watch a film where somebody struggles with that language, and pacing and timing is a big part of that. If it just isn't working, it's like somebody doesn't speak the language. But when you do it right, and we've watched so many films and so many TV shows that we kind of know the language, so you kind of go from there. But that language is changing, just like slang or anything like that, and their way of taking it in. We talk about the sort of CSI, NCIS thing with them all in a room, with 10 people talking and finishing each other's sentences. They're used to that, and so it doesn't sound wrong to their ears.
Right. No, in terms of like the JJ reboots, I was on board for the preservation of the original timeline in the first new movie. I was like, I like this. This saves everything that I grew up knowing and loving, and it allows for them to go in a new direction. So that makes perfect sense to me. I was along for the ride.
Yes.
Then the second film, I actually still liked, because I was like, okay, so the Khan thing, this timeline has been advanced because of changes. So this is happening not the same way we remember. And
Right.
I really loved the switch as to who dies.
Oh,
Somehow I was like all on board with it. I was like, oh, this is great. I love this. But then the third movie was crap.
I'll be a little bit different. One thing I don't like with a lot of these reboots and things like that is the nudge, nudge, wink, wink. You know, the recognize this, remember this.
Yep,
we're talking about this. Because I think overall with all three movies, I was with you. I was on board with the first one. It was exciting, and it was. William Shatner was asked at a convention what he thought about it, and he said, "Well, you know, there was the prevailing wisdom in Hollywood was that no Star Trek movie could make over $100 million, and JJ made a movie that made over $100 million. So clearly, that was a good thing. But Chris Pine's Kirk depends on us knowing William Shatner's Kirk.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's almost no incidences of him actually being a good captain in any of these movies. Right. His reputation is entirely Shatner's, which doesn't happen in these movies.
Mm-hmm.
And so it always struck me as odd that, you know, Kirk never earns his hero status. He seems to be kind of a screw up in most of the movies.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the idea that they would redo that scene between Kirk and Spock with it flipped around almost word for word just was a little too much for me. It was kind of like on Smallville when, you know, they would have Clark Kent go to a costume party and he'd have a cape on and they'd say, "Oh, you look good in a cape," and he's like, "I don't think I'd ever wear a cape." And like, he's going to wear a cape. But
even in the premiere episode, Lana says, "Oh, come on," she's reading Nietzsche or whatever, and she says, "What are you, man or Superman?"
Yeah. And that's okay to a point, but when you start really pushing it, then it doesn't stand on its own. It requires you to have this foreknowledge of what this other Star Trek was and get that this is sort of a wink and a nod to some of these things. I didn't hate the third one, but I don't see a reason for a fourth one. I know they keep trying to do it.
No, I actually want a fourth one as long as it goes in a new direction and redeems this franchise. Because I thought the third one was like beaming while you're riding a motorcycle and crashing a starship through the glass, and it was so preposterously over the top that I just I was like, JJ has jumped the shark.
Well,
with Alias was really good and intriguing up until the end, and it just turned into a big mess. And I think that's what JJ does, is he has good ideas but not good endings.
Yeah, I didn't watch Alias, but my sort of feeling on JJ Abrams is that they're very enjoyable while you're watching them, as long as you don't stop to think about it.
Exactly.
Because if you stop to think about it, there's no foundation to it, and it all just collapses. The Transporter is one of those things that you always have to be careful with, because, you know, it's the question always comes up. Well, because they're kind of doing this with Strange New World, this idea that you can save somebody in the pattern buffer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why wouldn't you save your bridge crew, your important staff in the thing, so that if your captain does get killed, you've got another captain, you've got a backup. And when you say you could do that, I mean, there's an ethical or moral thing to consider about this idea. And they kind of did that with did they do it in the Next Generation or Deep Space Nine, where there was a Riker saved in a transporter that had come out?
There was, in Next Gen, Riker was beaming off a planet, and his signal got split into two. One bounced back and one made it. And years later, they found the one that was bounced back, so he had a brother.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, which is an interesting idea. But on the original series, the big thing they had to do was take away their communicators. As soon as they would land on a planet, they'd get captured, and the people would take away their communicators, because there's no peril, there's no danger if they can just say, "Beam me up."
Right.
And so yeah, there's these elements, that you have to kind of be careful to work around and try to have some limitations on. But if you start just opening it wide to essentially, doing magic, whatever, I found a crystal that'll let us travel in time.
You have to, as a writer, you have to be aware of the ramifications of your inventions.
Yeah.
Because your audience is going to nitpick it and say, well, why didn't they do that then?
Right. And, the transporters were a budgetary consideration, because you couldn't land the ship. That would be too expensive to show on a regular basis. They didn't start off the series with the shuttlecraft.
Yeah.
And it's fun to watch. The shuttlecraft, they got essentially for free. The Enterprise model was such a bestseller with AMT that they made them a deal that they said, okay, we'll give you the rights to this shuttlecraft if you make us the actual prop. The prop is 3/4 size. So if you watch any episode where the shuttlecraft prop is in the shot, you'll notice that they'll film it with fisheye lenses. They'll try to do things to make you not notice that it's really too small for them to be in. When they go to the inside, suddenly it's a nice big set.
Exactly.
But on the outside, it's not, they're as tall as the set is.
That's
as
not
the
the first thing that's bigger on the inside, though.
Yeah, it's true. Yes. But no, I mean, it's great fun. And I think one of the things too is that we had Star Trek in syndication. We did have the cartoon, but we went most of our childhood with there being no new Star Trek.
Right.
And even when the movies came out, they were not coming out on a regular basis. There were 2 or 3 years between them. And so there was plenty of time to think about all this stuff. And I think the reason why we have fan films and stuff is this desire for the Star Trek fans to have new content, even if they make it themselves, fan fiction, all of that, was that we just had this long dry period where there was time to think about it. And nowadays, everything is just thrown at you. There's not any kind of shortage. I mean, there's Strange New Worlds, there's Discovery. Picard only has one more season. There's Lower Decks. There's
Prodigy.
Yeah. So, and they're talking about more. That's 5 Star Trek shows that are running concurrently. Basically, they're trying to get to a point where Paramount Plus can have a new Star Trek show. At any given time of the year, you're always watching Star Trek. That's mind blowing compared to what.
Oh, the dearth we had growing up.
Yeah, I mean, the guy who works for me, he's 23, and he's a huge fan of the Marvel movies, which I am too, loving comics and stuff. But it occurs to me that he's had these movies since he was a kid. And, there's 20 something of these Marvel movies, and they're making new shows, and there's just an enormous amount of things. And when we were kids, there just wasn't much of that. And when we did get, Spider-Man or the Incredible Hulk, if it wasn't a cartoon, it was nothing like the comic. It was, there were great limitations, and we knew that, if it was the Incredible Hulk, he was going to be Banner most of the time. He'd come out as Hulk at the end. And if it's Spider-Man, same deal. He's going to be Peter Parker most of the time.
Yeah,
because
Incredible Hulk had the most depressing theme song.
Oh yeah, that it was the Fugitive. I wasn't aware of that show when I was a kid, but I watched it when I was in college, and you were like, oh, that's what the Incredible Hulk show is. It's the Fugitive, with him going into town,
Yes.
into different towns, and that depressing walk at the end because he has to leave again. But that first pilot, the first TV movie for The Incredible Hulk, really was good, and there were some good episodes. It was well written and well acted.
Yeah. Like that and the
Even
show.
Spider-Man show, I wouldn't go that far as saying there were good episodes.
No, it wasn't good, but it was fun to watch as a kid because you're just like, oh, it's
Yes.
Spider-Man.
Yeah. So I mean, it's astonishing to think we're in a time. Netflix did that Dark Crystal series. Did you see that?
Yes, of course I did.
It's amazing that we lived in a time where they could actually do that. I think now maybe they're going to start backing off some of that stuff because the streaming services aren't getting. They're starting to lose money instead of everything going up. But it's crazy to think that something like that would have happened, and all the things that have been coming forth, and so we've got a wealth of Star Trek. It's unfortunate that it's not as exciting or as familiar as what it used to be. Yeah.
Well, we could do more of these episodes, but maybe we can wrap things up with a question for you. Where do you think on Star Trek 5?
What do I think about Star Trek 5?
Or what's your ranking of the first 6?
I would probably go 2, 6, 4, 3, 1, and 5.
5 is the worst. Okay.
Yeah. The thing I like about the 5th one are the scenes with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy around the campfire.
Mm-hmm.
The scenes of them just being friends are really good. The actual episode or the actual plot of the story doesn't work.
That's the thing, is it's just an episode. It wasn't a movie.
Yeah.
So I was okay with that. I'm like, oh, this is just like an episode. And to your point, yes, their interactions, the camping, and especially when they get brought back to the ship after they've been camping in the woods for days or however long, it's just probably their best interaction out of all the films. They're standing in a turbo lift, and Kirk says, "I need a shower." And Spock says, "Yes."
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I had this fantasy at that time that I wish those 3 actors had been able to make some, movie that wasn't Star Trek related.
Yeah.
But, 3 of these 3 older guys in, some kind of Sunshine Boys type, thing, I think would have been great, because the chemistry that those 3 people had was excellent and they were entertaining to watch. I do know, the backstory was that, Shatner wanted to do a story where they were all, where Kirk was basically alone, that everybody turns on him. And Nimoy and DeForest Kelley were like, our characters would never turn our backs on Kirk. It wouldn't happen. There's not a way that you could do that. So when you have the core of what it is you're trying to tell a story that you can't do, then the story just kind of meanders. It becomes the first time that we found out that Spock had a secret sibling until Discovery, when we find out he had another sibling that we didn't know about.
Exactly. And I love Shatner's line, "Pardon me, what does God need with a starship?"
That's a great line. Kirk is cooler in the movies even than he was on the show. Yeah. He was cool on the show, but he's got some great lines in Star Trek 2, where he's pulling the wool over Don's eyes and doing the.
That's another thing I meant about how they revealed layers, the mystery for the audience in that Spock says, "If we go by the book, hours could mean days." And then all of a sudden, Captain Kirk's like, "Oh yeah, it's been 2 hours, so they're done."
Yeah,
that it was
Regulation 46A. If transmissions are being monitored during a battle, no uncoded messages on a insecure channel.
Exactly, and so he pulled the wool over Khan's eyes and the audiences, And,
yes.
and then until it was revealed, it's like, oh God, this is good writing.
Yeah, and then he pulls out the communicator and says, "Kirk to Enterprise, Spock, it's been 2 hours," and he's going, and everything is, and yeah, they knew exactly what each other meant, and it was great.
Yes.
And yeah, so but that's what I was talking about. They never gave that to Chris Pine's Kirk. He has that reputation without actually having ever done any of those.
Well,
things.
and they try to explain it by having Spock say he's going to be a great captain, so you need to let him be the captain.
Yes.
He didn't earn it yet.
Yeah.
Will.
He's shown absolutely no proof that this is the case.
Exactly.
But yeah. Oh, we could go back in circles around all of this stuff. I love talking about Star Trek. It's
Definitely. Well, I'm going to try to schedule some more of these with other filmmakers. But yeah, I will come back to you for more Star Trek.
oh, excellent. We can maybe talk about how they eventually do mess up Strange New Worlds.
We'll see. I'm about to watch episode 4 tonight.
Okay.
So yeah, but I'm liking the ride so far.
Yeah. I like the guy who plays Pike is really, really good.
Yeah. Yes.
And I like is it Ethan Peck who plays Spock? I think I like all the characters, which is not something I can say about the other new Star Trek shows.
And I like the young Uhura. And
Yeah.
even have Nurse Chapel on there. But my understanding is that this takes place like 10 years before Kirk and Spock. So Spock was a lieutenant for like a really long time.
Yeah. Well, we have the cage, so we know what the Enterprise, what the crew was at that point. So you just have to kind of toss all that. You have to say this is a retelling. This is Star Trek made as a modern show. They'll give us little Easter eggs or things to say, oh, well, see, it's still kind of connected to them.
Mm.
But even with Enterprise to me looked like a precursor to the Next Generation, not a precursor to the original series. Even with the uniforms, they were sort of, NASA jumpsuits or whatever, but they had sort of the piping on them reminded you of those colored shoulders that they had on the Next Generation uniforms, later on. But yeah, so.
Well, you got to beam out of here.
Oh, do I get to beam out? Do we get
Sure.
to do a Vulcan salute before we go?
Live long and prosper.
Long and prosper.
Okay. Good night.
Peace and long life. Yeah.